day and welcome to Gaining Vision with Melanie Taddeo-Nxumalo. Thanks so much for coming back to the channel. Have you had an opportunity to subscribe yet? If not, take a second, hit subscribe, and please don't forget to like and share. I am so excited. I'm here today with two great new friends from Cape Town, South Africa, to have a conversation about one of our favorite topics, inclusion. Hi, Jenny, how you doing?
It's great to be here with you. Great to be here.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hello, Melanie. It's good to be with you.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. Now, I'm going to have these wonderful individuals introduce themselves because they can share their stories. And you know me, I love hearing about people's lived experiences. I'm going to start with Jeremy. Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, yes, my name is Jeremy Opperman. I live in Cape Town, South Africa, have done most of my life. I'm visually impaired, or rather I'm blind now, in a sense that I lost my vision over many years. I have RP, retinitis pigmentosa, and so I'm now essentially blind. I have just a little bit of light perception left. I went to a mainstream school and I went to university, and I worked for 10 years in the training and development industry, but in the marketing area and sales area. And then in 1999, I began my own business and very quickly realized that there was a product in disability equity, which was related to a piece of legislation in South Africa at the time. And so I then focused entirely my business in disability inclusion. I realized very quickly that a better, rather than trying to find people with disabilities, the game should be that we should try and prepare organizations for integration with people with disabilities. And I've been doing that ever since. So literally, it's my 24th year now in doing that, disability integration preparation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And I know you are one of the right people to talk to about this topic because you've got vast experience. Jenny, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Jennifer Webster, and I'm commonly Jenny. But yeah, I've been visually impaired due to Stargardt's for many years. And typical Stargardtians, I think we kind of pretend that we can see for many years. So it took a long time for me. I went through mainstream schooling and university, but also it took a long time to really come to terms with my vision loss. And it was only in my 40s that I really went to go and get help from a society that had the B word in it. So blind. And I think I ran from that word for many years because I've always struggled to see detail, to read and to write and see money, but I've been able to move around quickly. So I played a lot of sport, and that really gave me confidence, to sort of pretend. But I think it was that coming to terms with the grief and the loss of your vision that really spurred me on to make some life changes. And that it was in that process, I actually got very ill. And then I started to think, well, what can I do with visual impairment that I couldn't do if I was sighted? And I started thinking, well, what is my highest contribution to society? I'd like to be a contributor, not just a receiver. Yeah, and out of that, I've basically one step to another, I've landed up as an entrepreneur. I'm so glad I've met Jeremy. I'm learning a lot from him step by step in business, and also being a visually impaired business owner. You come under a lot of accessibility blockages and hurdles along the way as well. So yeah, it's a journey, and it's been fun to meet other people on similar journeys to encourage each other. So that's it in a nutshell, and it's lovely to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now, we have heard the buzzwords diversity and inclusion for years, decades, in fact. Why do you think this is still a conversation that we're still having in 2023? Jeremy?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's two answers to that. Yes, the diversity word has been buzz and vogue for some years. And I think, so that why I say there's two answers is because there's the way that disability fits into that narrative, the diversity inclusion narrative. And then there's the fact that we struggle with diversity at any given time. Given unconscious biases and even conscious biases, we have a resistance to change. We have a resistance to wanting to acknowledge things like biases. And so they're very difficult to overcome. And so these older paradigms are hard. I always use the analogy of gender. You know, women have had the votes for 100 years in most countries in the world. And yet still there are glass ceilings, still there are nonsense hoops that women have to jump through. And that just shows you how slow these paradigms are. So that hopefully that diversity buzz will not in fact flag, and hopefully it will maintain its impetus. Now, the second part is important, is does disability equitably fit within the diversity narrative? And my argument would be no. The more I read, the more I realize that we're forcing this thing. We're trying to put a square into a round hole by trying to incorporate disability in a way in the diversity narrative.
Very interesting perspective. Thanks so much for sharing. Now, Jenny, how about you? Why do you think diversity and inclusion are still buzzwords and we're still discussing it here in 2023?
I think it's because we all have a story. You know, for each of us, we are born into a culture. You know, we've all got roots, and those roots are in a particular ground, in a particular, you know, environment. Whether we were a wanted child or an unwanted child, whether it was a happy marriage or not, we're born into a culture in our family. We're born into, you know, we all carry the way of seeing the world from very young. And I think just as people, we all want to stay in the known place where we feel known, where we feel safest, and where we feel least challenged to look at life through somebody else's eyes. So that's really the sort of the human perspective. So I think a lot of things as well, when we look at life, the things that are not, you can't categorize as right and wrong. They're categorized as, this is your story and this is my story. And how do we listen to each other's story, or how do we glean and learn from each other in whatever, you know, every family is different. You can come from the same culture, the same language, the same people group or whatever, but you have got two family cultures where there is a difference. And that's why I think diversity is learning to embrace and learn from other people. That's really my non-academic explanation from my point of view.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's interesting, as I was doing my research for my business, I was discovering that obviously there are barriers and challenges across the globe for individuals with disability. It's not just something in Canada that I was facing on a regular basis. So when I was looking at South Africa specifically, I noticed there's so many similarities. And prior to coming to South Africa in January, I wanted to understand. So I was connecting with individuals just to learn what was happening on the ground. Now, today I have a captive audience of you guys, for you guys to be the experts in South Africa. And I really would love to understand from your perspective, how is inclusion for individuals with disabilities right now in South Africa? And it can be in the community, it can be at work, it could be in schools. So I'll let you guys pick which angle you want to take, and we'll start with Jenny first.
I think, you know, in many ways, Jeremy has a better sort of feel for what's going on in this place, because I've sort of been outside of the disability circles for many years. It's something I haven't really stepped into and until recently. And it's been a wonderful transition, just finding a whole lot of people with disabilities who are so inclusive of each other and each other's journeys, and really having a lot of fun on the way, but also supporting each other through frustrations. So yeah, so I think I've got a more layman's perspective on this. And I would say it's difficult. I think there's not a lot of design that goes around for people with disabilities. People don't realize that they're people with visual impairments or hearing difficulties, or, you know, as people get arthritis, the buttons on the digital spaces need to be bigger. And so for me, one of the things I've noticed is really in the design world. And during COVID, when everything went online, I think for me, I suddenly realized that as a person with a barrier, you know, to participating in everyday activities, it shouldn't be a barrier, but a lot of things became barriers. And I started to notice particularly the digital exclusion when it came to online shopping, banking, you know, activities one would think of daily living. Yeah, so that's kind of my perspective on
That
that.
makes a lot of sense, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think all of us experienced that in some shape or form during the pandemic for sure. So Jeremy, same question to you. How is it in South Africa in the area of inclusion for persons with disabilities, and from your perspective?
Whew, it's quite a tough question, particularly in a short time frame that we have, because it involves several dynamics. One of them is classism. I mean, every country has its classistness, but we do too. So we have an incredibly dangerously wide gap between the have and the have-nots. And we've got a large have-not population. Now, in any country in the world, your poorer class will have many persons with disabilities within it, and in fact disproportionately high. That's just the fact of life. So from that point of view, the poorer classes will always struggle a great deal with disability inclusion. And by the inclusion part, I mean the fundamentals that Jen and I take for granted. We went to good schools, we went to good universities, we live in middle-class homes. And so there's a privilege that needs to be checked here, because there are two very different worlds in a country where the divide is so stark. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is that in South Africa, we made a fundamental error 28 years ago. We created a wonderful constitution in 1996, which incorporated the word disability, and it said you may not discriminate on the grounds of disability. That was great, and we thought that was very clever, and it was to an extent. The trouble is, while we were doing that, the rest of the world was working on creating their overarching disability-specific legislations, which we didn't do. And we settled for a piece of labor legislation called the Employment Equity Act, which incorporates a need to apply affirmative action criteria to disability as well as race and gender. Wonderful, except that labor legislation has no jurisdiction out of labor. And so we have this, so every bit of energy in this country, and there's a lot of it actually, there's a lot of compliance mentality is focused on employment of persons with disabilities. Unfortunately, there is no energy, compliance-related energy, to focus on things like transport and education, particularly education, and access. As much as there are guidelines, there is no actual legislation. And so that's our challenge. We haven't got overarching legislation to strategically, systemically direct the inclusion of persons with disabilities. And that's sadly our greatest challenge. Until such time that we have an act, a Disability Rights Act, which we should have by now, and there is a white paper with that name, but it's still not turning into act, and it probably won't for the next 3 or 4 years. We will always struggle. So what you'll get is ad hoc examples of inclusion, ad hoc energy, but no systemic energy until such time that happens.
Jeremy, you bring up so many very good points, and thank you for that. I will ask this question to both of you again. I really would like to understand what it is do you feel it will take? Do you think that individuals with disabilities need to come forward and help take this forward? Or do you think there needs to be a shift in mentality and mindset at the leadership level of understanding inclusion for persons with disabilities? Jeremy, you can answer first if you like.
So, Melanie, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I got the question. There was a little gap there. I beg your pardon.
We'll try.
There was a little glitch. So try it again. I'm very sorry.
No problem. So I was asking, what do you think needs to happen? Is it that there needs to be a shift in the mindset at the leadership level, or do you think that individuals with disabilities need to take an active role, or both?
Very good. Right. Excellent. Now I got it. Now, thank you. Super question, and the answer is obviously both. But the second part, where you say that people with disabilities need to get more active, unfortunately, is very true. You know, the world knows all about the passing of Judy Heumann recently, and that legacy is enormously important, because without her energy and advocacy, there's a good chance, in fact, that the ADA wouldn't have been written in 1990. It almost certainly would have come about eventually, but the fact is that you do need advocacy. Now, what we have in a country like ours, because we do come from a dictatorial regime 30 years ago and before, and so we don't have a great experience of advocacy, actually, outside of a political agenda. And so people with disabilities have very often, or has far too often, grown comfortable in complacency with, they take it on the chin and they take what they're given, and they honestly don't have any expectation of what might be different, because we've never seen anything different. Unless you've traveled overseas, you literally wouldn't know what you might expect. And so many people with disabilities disempower themselves simply because they simply don't know what might be if they were to be exposed to it. Similarly, the NGO sector, what we loosely call here the disability sector, are very often, they lack the fortitude to get into the advocacy world, because most of the time they're spending so much time and energy on raising funds for their projects, and they spend a disproportionate amount of time fundraising and far more on actually making sure they can pay the bills, and particularly the salaries, and therefore they focus on projects rather, and the projects are never advocacy based. They're always delivery and service delivery. And lastly, there's the political agenda. And so until such time, once again, if you don't have the rules, no one's going, even good leaders won't. So you would need maverick leaders to ensure that we get the appropriate legislation. Secondly, you would need, in any country, you have three arms. You have your national, provincial, and local government. And so it's not a simple matter just to say, okay, we've got an act. You've actually got to comply with it. And any country in the world breaks itself down. And so you've got to ensure that your provincial structures are playing the game. Then you've got to ensure that your local governments are playing the game. Now, in a country like ours, where we are somewhat fraught with very many socio-political issues, we have an electricity crisis on our hands, we have a water crisis on our hands, we have nearly 40% unemployment on our hands. There are many fish to fry. And so local government, provincial governments are often too busy, frankly, to care. Once again, if there was legislation, we would have the lever to ensure some sort of compliance, and that's how to lead.
And thank you so much. Before I can go to Jenny for your response, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's interesting with the passing of Judy. It was so sad, but here in Canada, David Onley, who was our champion for disability rights and creating the AODA, our legislation and policies here, passed away as well in January. So it's just such a sad year of loss. Yes. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. Two great leaders and champions for the disability movement, both lost in the same year. It's sad. So Jenny, now for you, what is your take on this? What do you think needs to happen? Do individuals with disabilities need to step up, or do we need a mind shift change at the leadership helm?
I think, as Jeremy said, we obviously need both. But for me personally, I got to a place in my life I thought, how long am I going to sit around, struggling with things? And basically, I think I just thought, can I make a difference? And why not me? And I think Jeremy must have said the same. I think that's why you probably said the same thing, Melanie, because that's why you're doing what you're doing, is that sometimes it takes people just to step up and do something. It doesn't really matter what you do, but do something and do it with passion for the right reason and right motives. And I think this is where I've kind of lost a little bit of faith in government leadership and in disability sector to really make a way for people with disabilities, and just think, well, if it's going to be up to us, what can we do in that? And so I've just thought, well, let me just see if I could make the most of this horrible situation of losing one's eyesight, what would it look like? And I want to have a lot of fun doing this. So what I've done is I've just started to make little video clips, just cheering on when accessibility is great, fantastic. When design for, inclusion in a building is great, I cheer it on. And I'm just finding places to cheer on what is right. And that's really my strategy. I'm not sure if anyone else, I'm sure there are other people who do that, but I just thought I'm not going to hang around waiting for permission. I'm just going to get on and do what I need to do. And part of that was realizing, oh, I need to create a product. And so just even being, an entrepreneur. And I mean, we know the stats on entrepreneurship and first-time business owners, they're not great, but you know what, I'm giving this my best shot. And I just thought if I could just make a difference to a couple of people by stepping up and trying, then maybe someone in the next generation will say, hey, look, there's a baton to take on. I'd also like to try that. And I think there are some wonderful people doing wonderful things in disability. And it's important that we also then glean together and connect in with the disability sector, that we've got more of a social connection, sort of like a natural social network by which we can then have some kind of clout to say things rather from the ground up than waiting for top-down measures to be put in place. So yeah, I think it was an excellent question, and I think it's both.
Thank
both
you so much. In Canada, with the Accessible Canada Act, we have a statement, nothing about us without us, which basically means that individuals with disabilities need to be included in every decision-making from the ground up. Any company that is going to implement a policy, they need to have a group of individuals with various disabilities come to the table, have a discussion, give their input so that it's realistic. It's not just like, oh, we should do this, because again, people that don't have the lived experience can't say what should happen. Do you feel that this is something that is happening in South Africa or should be implemented? And I'll start with Jenny.
Look, it can be implemented, but once you put legal things in place, you lose the spirit of the thing. And so yes, we need to have legal entities, we need to have policies, we need to have the encouragement of good governance and, community participation. I also think, though, that it is great to sort of to champion a cause and to get people behind it, motivated behind it. And what I would like to see more is that people with disabilities starting to realize how much creativity we carry within us. We're great problem solvers. All of us solve problems, make ways to cope in a world we learn to think out of the box. And I really think we've got a lot to give to the non-disabled community. And I don't think we've seen the value of that. I really feel like as people with disabilities, we are a treasure trove of solution makers. And I think it's a process of changing our mindsets to say, how do we do this? But also, how do we get to participate? Will we be let into the conversations? And if we won't, then we need to make some waves in a way that encourage people to say, let's hear what's happening. Let's hear what's happening here.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and that's great. Jeremy, your thoughts on nothing about us without us?
Absolutely. I was quite cynical about that term. We all use it. The whole world uses that term. And I used to be a little cynical about it sometimes, but it is absolutely true. It has to come into it. I mean, there are times when, you can't always consult the individual and expect an answer, because sometimes one doesn't know what one needs and you need to consult others. But the principle remains, we have to be more included in consultation if you wish to progress, and if you wish to make something practical work, rather than, and this is the trouble, is people with disabilities have been largely spoken to rather than included in society in all over the world, and definitely that is the case here. And so it's very important to have that. The trick is, when Jen was talking, I was thinking, it reminded me so much of, once again, a classic diversity narrative, which is that, the most classic diversity trope, of course, is that The world will benefit from diversity. When you have diversity, you literally benefit. You benefit from the difference. And we know that in politics, women have added a different tech, and in corporates, women have added a different texture in directorship and leadership. And race allows for greater understanding of market share and inclusion stories. And the same applies with disabilities, is that there's something to learn. Jen's absolutely right. There's a great deal to be gained from people with disabilities. We are not our disabilities. We are people who happen to have disabilities. And if you exclude the experience, remember, there's a little known or a little appreciated fact that the majority of people with disabilities acquired their disabilities later. And the point of that message is that they come with skills, they come with experience, and with a systemic exclusion, we're losing that. And so there's a business case to be made for inclusion. And that little slogan, nothing for us without us, helps us maintain that and helps. It's a flag to wave. So it's a good one. It's a useful talisman.
Thank you, Jeremy. And you're absolutely right. And you segued beautifully into my next question. So thank you for that. No, again, a global issue. The workplace, it's not always inclusive for individuals with disabilities. There are barriers and challenges, myths, misconceptions about employers hiring people with disabilities. So we know unemployment, as you mentioned, in South Africa on a whole is 40%, but for individuals with disabilities across the globe, it is a barrier. So a lot of individuals with disabilities decide to take the route of entrepreneurship, and all three of us have done just that. Can you tell me from your perspective why this was for yourself, and maybe talk a little bit about the type of business you are running, and then of course what the benefits for us as individuals with disabilities to really explore this option? And I'm going to start with Jeremy, please.
Once again, it's a tough question in the time frame. So I chose entrepreneurship because, quite frankly, I was getting tired of being retrenched. I've been retrenched 3 times in 10 years because the businesses kept closing or changing. And so I began entrepreneurship, fully aware that it was going to be very challenging. And fortunately, I made it work. But I'm always, once again, I'm a little cynical of entrepreneurship as a thing. You know, people teach entrepreneurship, they mentor entrepreneurship, they coach entrepreneurship, and not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. And unfortunately, people with disabilities, I think, are disproportionately prone to having to follow self-employment. Self-employment isn't always the same as entrepreneurship, but it's a close thing. And so there's an unfortunate connection between having to do it because you've got to eat to being a good entrepreneur. Now, Jen is an excellent example of a genuine entrepreneur. She really does embody entrepreneurship. I, on the other hand, don't necessarily. I'm self-employed because I don't employ others. And Jen, in a sense, will and does. I can employ others when I'm very busy and I outsource some stuff. But so that's the first thing, is that I'm very conscious of the fact that too many people feel that they have to follow an entrepreneur or think that they're going to succeed in an entrepreneurship world, and don't always realize the challenges, the feast and famine. I can tell you, after 24 years of self-employment, the ups and downs, the feast and famine existence is extremely tiring and fatiguing, and you can certainly do well, and then there are going to be slumps. And so it's not for the faint-hearted. And so I'm a little cautious of people say, oh, we must teach more people to be entrepreneurs. I'm sorry, I don't believe that everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. I don't believe that for a single minute. I will find ironic how many people shout about teaching people entrepreneurs and they themselves have salaries and aren't in fact entrepreneurs themselves. So I'm a little cautious about the entrepreneurial game. It has to happen because it's a needs must thing. I think as entrepreneurs, we can provide a great deal, but it does concern me from a strict employment point of view. Back to the employment reality is a really interesting one in the world, but that's perhaps another topic to explore in more depth. So I'll leave it at that. My feelings about entrepreneurship.
Okay, so we will definitely connect again on that topic. Jenny, how about you? Your thoughts?
Well, I don't really like to label myself as an entrepreneur per se, because what is that? And it comes and goes. As Jeremy says, it's a tough journey. And at the moment, I'm able to employ people to help me get my business off the ground, but sustainability is going to be in the balance all the time. So for me, I had the attitude, because I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I'm actually trained in education and I'm passionate about sport. I was trained a little bit in, had some leadership opportunities for young people. I also believe in other people and people filling the gaps that you can't, whether you got an impairment or not. We all need people. And I just love the team aspect of life. I suppose that's why I enjoy sport. And I think the entrepreneurship journey is also something that needs to be, it seems like, oh, he's a self-made person or she's a self-made person. I don't think anybody's self-made. I think it's something you can do as a community and glean off your community as much as possible. And I think for me, my journey, I just took the whole idea that work is a blessing and not a right. I think with 1% of visually impaired people employed in our country, that's incredibly low. I thought, what are the chances of getting a job that would fit me? And I thought, well, why not make a job? Why not fit me into a job? And let's see. So I decided, let me work and then see whether I can get paid for that as it goes along. So that was really, I didn't plan the cost of entrepreneurship before I started, which would have been a wise thing to do. But I've just sort of gone as maybe to my nature, just to be risky and just to try and to be tenacious and to keep at it and to pivot when I need to and create new plans and let go of things as it grows. So I don't know if that was a very clear answer, but
that was great. And Jenny, tell us a little bit about your business, please.
Well, I was struggling to, I use a desktop magnifier and I was using software for the computer that I couldn't afford anymore. This was back a couple of years ago, whereas now I didn't know about NVDA and open source software then. So I couldn't afford the software anymore to be able to use my computer. And I thought, well, what else can I do? So I thought, I've got my phone in my hand and I rely a lot on a magnifier, particularly when I'm away from my desk. I want to be able to see, but I couldn't find something to hold my phone still so that I could magnify in or do two-handed tasks. So I created a device stand, almost like a document stand, but I needed something close to the space with a lot of airspace. And it's only as a user that I could see this is the kind of design that I wanted. So yeah, I spent years doing that, trying to make it as affordable as possible with recycled material. And then thanks to the SAB Foundation Disability Empowerment Awards, I won some an investment award, and from that got some business mentoring. So I've had a year of mentoring and to really steep learning curves. It's been fun and exhausting and exhilarating, and I'm on the journey. Not sure where you're going to land up, but it's fun doing it, and I'll have no regrets.
Amazing. And the name of your business?
It's called Curable, C-U-R-able. So it's a play on C, you are able. So it's about seeing, it's also about who you are, the identity of who you are as a person and your skills and talents. And then about your ability and how you can shift and change things to either, lower the bar on what you want to do or raise or change the bar so that it suits your ability for best contribution to your community. So my product is called Pad Perch.
The name, Pad Perch, good.
Yes, the name of so the business is not Pad, the product is called a Pad Perch because it's a phone and sort of pad tablet stand. But the business is called Curable, C-U-R-able. So also doing a little bit of consulting just around awareness for inclusion, particularly around design in the digital and physical spaces. Not just disability, but into the senior years, those new to disability. And I think we've got, a lot of money is in our senior sector. The silver economy is there. And I think it's important to actually let the disability flow into seniors, because what is, essential for some of us, it becomes useful for everybody.
Absolutely, and that's great. And as I told you before, I'm one of your first purchases of the design. Trust me, because I so need that device. So next time I'm in South Africa, I'm going to pick one up, maybe two. All right, Jeremy, let's hear about your business, please.
So I sort of alluded to it in the beginning. So I'm simply a consultant, and I've been very privileged to have been very busy over 24 years, and so that busyness has allowed me to get a really rich perspective in the attitudes of several of my products. In the old days, I had a couple of products which involved surveying management about their attitudes for disability, and then surveying staff with disabilities about their experiences. And that data, and there wasn't small, I mean, there was like 200 people with disabilities I interviewed. And that data was very valuable in seeing the patterns. And so I'm essentially a consultant. I do a lot of leadership work in the sense of executive. I devised a program called Meeting Disability. My business name is a bit confusing because on the one hand, I am Jeremy Opperman and Associates, and on the other hand, I bought the URL called disabilitydesk literally 7 years ago. I just had an insight, and I bought the URL, and I've kept it going. And so my website is not my name, but on my website, www.disabilitydesk.co.za, you can see a range of things that I do. And so in my consulting, I do a lot of training, a lot of awareness training, which ranges from executive to human resources to line management and supervisory to staff, and also hospitality. I devise various tools and things that went with some of the programs. I've got some interesting handouts, which I've been working on for years to make them less throwawayable. I devised a strategic tool in my sort of executive work. I found an amazing thing, which anybody listening will identify with from business, is that leaders have an extraordinarily short attention span. They're like gerbils. And you need something that will maintain their attention. And so if you write a disability strategy and you write it in a linear way, it'll take 30, 40 pages. Nobody reads 30, 40 pages, particularly executives. And so I wanted to find a way to capture a company's disability strategy on one page as a dashboard. So I created a strategic approach called Eating Elephants, which is, it's a play on the old joke, can one eat an elephant? And the answer is, of course you can, as long as you do it one bite at a time. And so I've got a 4-quadrant disability inclusion strategy that one can follow. And there's a rather cute Excel-based dashboard that will help you monitor your progress and to maintain. The idea was that you could flash it up every quarter, every time they have a board meeting or a ManCom meeting, you flash it up to see your progress, your disability equity progress. It hasn't been as active because I had a bit of a hiatus for a couple of years as I did a long project with our Western Cape province, and I ran the disability desk for the Western Cape province for 5 years, and they were my principal client. And sadly, I had to forego some of my other consulting work. But I see no reason why Eating Elephants actually is as timeless as the day I created it. So that's really it. It's I'm a clear thinker in the area of disability inclusion, and I'd like to think I'm one of the few people that really get the broader macro picture of disability inclusion, which includes, for instance, the business case, which is the best kept secret.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I do a lot of work to try to turn people's minds. I'm a paradigm shifter, I suppose you could say. I'm desperately trying to get people to think, to get away from the older medical model paradigm, which we were all brought up in, towards a more business case social model paradigm. So that's really me.
And no wonder I've been pulled towards both of you guys. You're innovators. I love it. And I'm so excited to have started the conversation with you guys. And I guess I say started because there's so many more things I want to ask, but I am going to ask I have two final questions. The first one is, what is your vision of inclusion for South Africa, or for the globe for that matter, in the next 25 years? And I'm going to start with Jenny.
My vision for global is actually pockets of local. Because even where we live, you know, within our little communities and our streets and the little shop we go to shop at every day or whenever we can get out, the places we meet people, I think that's where people with disabilities can make a difference. And that's where small shop owners and people on the way can really experience inclusion, whether you're walking towards the taxi with somebody else who's going to work. I think in South Africa as well, we've got such diversity. Often, you know, I speak to the people who are taking rubbish out of the bins when I walk in the mornings, and I've got a relationship there now with people. These are humans who are in a bad situation on the streets, or people who are domestic workers who are walking to work, and I get to be a pedestrian. So, you know, I think we can think global, but I think global is made up of so many little pockets of local. And I think as people with disabilities, we could start making differences in our little communities, because somewhere in that is living the CEOs of companies and the people who have sway. And I just think, yeah, so my vision for diversity is actually to practice it every day.
Amazing. Thank you, Jenny. I love that perspective. Jeremy, same question.
I enjoyed that too. That was super. Predictably, mine's going to be more complicated. So I've recently I've been quite exposed to a lot of people from overseas, and I've traveled to America recently over the holidays, and what I found quite interesting was how many people said to me, "Do you work?" And you know, I'm sure I don't look that old that I look like I'm a candidate for retirement. And I know what they mean. They didn't actually mean, am I retired now? What they meant was, do you work despite the fact that you're blind? And what interested me was that they were Europeans and Americans and Canadians. And it was fascinating how often people have said that. Now, what that tells me is that as much as I am very critical of where we are in my own country, in terms of how far we've got to go, I'm equally concerned that this issue of disability inclusion has not yet landed sufficiently to be complacent about. And like the work that women have had to do for millennia to find their foothold and their place in society, the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to motivate to be in a law school 60 years ago is staggering. And so with disability, the same thing. We cannot rest on our laurels that, oh, it'll sort itself out. Clearly, there is a great deal of work still needed to somehow get the message across. Now, I'm pretty sure I understand what that is. It's because we are clicking into a new paradigm of social model thinking around disability and sloughing off the old medical model paradigm. The problem is that cog change is slow, it's not quick. And so we need energy. So I think my answer is, my vision is that we don't become complacent, and that we progress more and more, so that something that Jen mentioned, the pockets of local. I think of pockets of excellence. I'd like to see more pockets of excellence. I'd like to see more examples of universal access in a broader way. And I'm confident it'll happen, actually, because I think it's our time. I really do. The energy at the moment is rich. There was a time when I used to feel quite lonely in this game, and now I don't. Now I feel almost threatened, because there's so much great thinkers out there and energy out there to challenge the status quo, and I just hope that we have the energy to maintain. And so that's my view for the next 25 years is keep working. And I think we will see, there's no question that things have changed in our country. There's definitely, we have seen change, good change. But it's obviously a great deal more to be done. And I suspect in the world the same thing. And the trick is not to get complacent.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Jenny, how can people reach out to you to get in touch? if you want to share your website, your social media handles.
Yeah, my website, which I'm about to rebrand, it's about to go live, is www.c-ur-able. So it spells curable with the dashes in it, .co.za. Or on Facebook, Curable with Jenny Webster. Yeah, Instagram is CURable, written in words, SEEYOU, because I see you are able.
And we'll definitely add these in the description below, guys. So don't panic if you didn't have a pen handy. Jeremy, how can people reach out to you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn at Jeremy Opperman, and also they can find me. I don't do Facebook well at all, but I'm on my website at www.disabilitydesk.co.za, and my email would be Jeremy, that's with a J, Jeremy, at disabilitydesk.co.za.
Thank you, guys. I have a list of topics that the three of us need to get together and have another one of these conversations. What do you guys say? Up for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Well,
I'm so glad Jeremy's here with all the with wisdom, and I feel like I've got too much energy, but I need the wisdom to help direct
you know
it.
what
So
it is?
it's so lovely to be together here on this platform. Melanie.
It's nice, actually. I like doing it together. It's a great dialogue.
Is because everybody has a different perspective, and I thank you both for your time today. To our audience, please tune in next time. We've got a lot more content coming your way, and again, more conversations with Jenny and Jeremy. And if you haven't yet, take a second, hit the notification button so that you're notified as soon as I upload some new content. Until next time, see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.